For this sample, we're going to start looking at wood graining. All right. Often a lot of shows require wood graining for hardwood floors or other components of moldings, other elements on stage that need to look like stained wood. We can't always, we definitely can't afford to, lay a hardwood floor for an entire set. So we need to paint it to represent hardwood floor. So what you'll need for this project, you'll need the other half of your page for doing a wood grain technique. You'll need a sample of a board of wood. I just have a piece of walnut that I found online. We have a variety of graining here. It's not just a straight grain. We have a little bit of a knot grain here, as well as some straight and some heartwood grain here. So we have a nice variety of wood grain to use for this particular board. We will need a pair of scissors. We will need a 2-inch brush, one of the brushes I gave you, and obviously your paper here. To start this off, we need to create a graining brush. All right. So what's fun about this is we need to create gaps and irregularities in our brush here. This is why I gave you these cheap, inexpensive chip brushes, because we can hack into this, give some variety to the paintbrush, and it will allow us to create wood graining very easily. If you remember, we did a dry brush technique earlier. We're going to expand upon that same technique by creating a brush that allows us to do some very nice wood graining in just single strokes. All right. So start off by we want to just kind of hack into this. I go long strokes and kind of chip out some of these hairs. These are all bristle hairs. So we want to create some line work here and really create some nice variation in your cuts. All right. So I'm really going to hack at this guy. I might come out with a big chunk out in the middle. And this will create a nice graining tool for doing wood grain. I'm going to keep hacking at this. I'm keeping the length of everything, but you can kind of see now that I'm starting to get some variety, right? I don't want them to be all the same, right? So maybe there's a fat piece here, a thinner piece here. I'm going to hack at this one a little bit more, open this up a bit. Maybe there's only 1 or 2 hairs in this area. I'm going to keep working at this to get it to a place that is good for a wood grain. I'm just kind of going back and forth at an angle, hacking out pieces. Go up fairly up close to the ferrule too. See how I'm getting some nice variety. This is turning out to be a pretty decent looking brush. So I'm going to cut some of this extra stuff off the sides. Remember, a lot of these chip brushes, they're not glued in very well. So you can kind of pull on, tug on them a little bit, and the hairs that aren't glued in will pull out. So I might hack into this corner a little bit more. I think that doesn't need to be so thick. I'm okay with that. All right. So if you look at this, let me lay this against the white paper, you can see how much I really hacked at it. And this kind of, if you look at it, if I'm looking at all these different lines that create the wood grain, this can create some interesting effects here. So you might find that as you test this out, that you may need to hack more at it. It may not be enough enough taken out to really do an effective wood grain. So sometimes we end up with just a few hairs really just kind of hanging on to create wood graining. All right. So I'm going to pull out some more of that. I like thinning them out pretty good. Over, maybe even over here too. So there's kind of what my brush will look like. I'm going to use this, and this will help me create a nice wood grain. All right, so that's step one. And go ahead and prepare your paint. We're going to do the same kind of process we did with the marble, but to less steps. We don't need as many steps to this. So when we look at our process here, the first thing we notice is that there is direction to our artwork, where the marble had all kinds of amorphous shapes and was very organic looking. This has a very linear approach to it. Yes, we do have sort of this mountainous kind of looking shape. And yes, this kind of goes off the page, that's fine. But overall, it has a feeling of starting at one side and going all the way in a straight line, right? And that's kind of what we want to do, is all of our brush strokes need to be linear. We won't be doing our X scumble pattern. We won't be doing any stippling, any motions like that. Everything will have a very linear, straight line approach to it. All right, so that's one thing we want to take note of. When I look at this, again, same process we did with the marble. I want to look at how I would apply this. And right now I see a dark area coming this direction, a lighter area in the middle, okay, going down to, let's see, I'll turn this to avoid the glare. So I have a darker area here, sort of a darker spot. We have sort of the kind of a warm brown in the middle, and then we have this darker area here at the top. So we know that we have essentially two main colors, sort of a reddish brown and then a darker reddish brown. It's definitely in the same value. We're using the same hue. I'm not same value, the same hue, but we're using different values of that hue. So I'm looking at this, and this is very much reminds me again of my favorite little burnt umber. If I can even lay this on top, we can kind of see that this reminds us very close to already, just right off the bat, with the darker brown here. All right, this lighter brown, I might look at some of my yellows, something like maybe a yellow ochre, or even a little bit of the golden yellow added to this to kind of give this a little yellower tint to it, a little more yellow hue. So at the moment, what I'm looking at is a burnt umber, probably a yellow ochre, or let's see, let's look at my palette here. Either the yellow ochre, or in your case, you guys probably all have the golden yellow, which would be the extreme of this. This is kind of in the middle, see? So you could use your golden yellow and add some of the burnt umber to achieve this. I'm going to go right for this and actually use this to create a different hue in between here that's closer to this color. All right, do you guys kind of see what I'm looking at here? The colors I'm looking at? All right, so there's I'm using a yellow ochre. You'll probably use the golden yellow, and by adding a little burnt umber to it, you'll achieve a yellow ochre. I'll still probably use a touch of black and maybe a touch of white, but very, very little. So we'll keep those on the side just in case. All right. So from moving on from that, what we want to do is think about our steps. So right now, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to get our wash down, our just base coat of paint. It is not a scumble. We're just going to wash paint in this one direction using a burnt umber, and I probably use just straight burnt umber, right? Just burnt umber and water and the medium to get a nice wash over the whole thing so that it's all one kind of color. And then we'll come in with a wash of the sort of the yellow ochre burnt umber mix to kind of create this sort of area, and might add a touch of black to the burnt umber to create this sort of area. So let's mark our layers. We got one being the burnt umber wash, and that's our base. All right, so you say base coat if you ever heard base coat. 2, we're going to go in with the areas. All right, so we've got the yellow ochre area, and we have the dark burnt umber. Now, another color that it comes into play when you're thinking artistry is a color called Van Dyke brown, and it's a very dark brown. And sometimes I like to mix that as part of my mix too. But we're going to with a dark umber, and these are area washes, okay, that are going on top. And again, it's pulled very much. The third layer is going to be our line work. All right, so this is, in this case, it's graining. And this is where we're going to manipulate these lines here. Now, before we were using white as our lining work with the marble. In this case, we're going to make a very dark, a dark brown, and do a little thicker, touch thicker than what we were doing. And then that will manipulate that. Now, one thing I want you to be aware of is I am not going to worry about drying in between each of these layers. I want it to have a little fuzziness, a little bleed between things. So I'm going to use that wetness of the paint under layers to help the over layers be a little more, have a little more bleed to them, a little more natural feel to them. All right, so we're going to not worry about drying. We're going to do this kind of all in steps, but without the dry time. The final, so after we do our graining, our fourth layer is going to be our glaze. Okay. And our glaze is going to be, again, the burnt umber. Again, you see we're using the burnt umber as our main color here, but we're going to use the burnt umber as a glaze over the whole thing. Now, mind you, just like with the other project, my glaze in that case would be a finish glaze. And the finish glaze, I would choose what sheen. So if I wanted this to be glossy or semi-gloss or satin finished, I would make my glaze with that finish sheen and add a touch of burnt umber to slightly tint it and act as a cohesive wash over the whole thing, and a glaze so it makes it all feel like one solid board as opposed to a lot of paint laying on top of each other. All right, so let's get started on that. We'll start by doing our burnt umber wash on the next part.